A single gunshot rang out over Blackwater Creek, silencing the morning birdsong and causing Hope Jameson to freeze in her tracks, the basket of laundered shirts still clutched in her trembling hands. She knew what that sound meant. They'd found her again. It was 1878 in the unforgiving territory of Montana, and Hope had only been in town for 3 weeks. Already, the whispers had started trouble follows that woman like flies on honey. The rumors weren't entirely wrong. Trouble did seem to shadow her every move, though not by any fault of her own. Hope gathered her skirts and hurried down the dusty path toward Mrs. Wilson's boarding house where she'd taken a room. The shirts would have to wait. She needed to pack her meager belongings and move on again. 5 towns in 8 months was becoming a disheartening pattern. "Miss Jameson." A deep voice called from behind. Hope quickened her pace, pretending not to hear. She had no desire to speak with anyone, especially not after gunfire had erupted so close to town. "Miss Jameson, please wait." The voice was closer now, accompanied by the sound of boots crunching on the gravel path. Hope sighed and turned, bracing herself for accusations or worse. Sheriff Coleman stood before her, hat in hand. "Miss Jameson, I need to speak with you about what happened at the Callahan ranch yesterday." "I was washing linens for Mrs. Wilson all day yesterday," Hope replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I haven't been to any ranch." The sheriff's weathered face remained impassive. "That may be, but Mr. Callahan's prized stallion is missing, and folks are saying they saw a woman matching your description near his property." "Well, folks are wrong," Hope said firmly. "I haven't left town since I arrived." Before the sheriff could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the main street. A group of men on horseback thundered into view, led by a tall figure with a shock of dark hair. Hope recognized the owner of the largest cattle operation in the territory, Harold Callahan, and her stomach dropped. His face was twisted with rage as he spotted her standing with the sheriff. "There she is," he bellowed, pointing a thick finger in her direction. "That's the thieving harlot who stole my Arabian." Hope stepped back, bumping into the sheriff. "Sir, I haven't stolen anything in my life." Callahan dismounted, his boots raising dust clouds as he stormed toward her. "My men saw you plain as day, woman. You and that no-good brother of yours." Hope's blood ran cold. "So they'd found Hank after all." Her brother had been on the run since a botched bank robbery in Kansas City, left a guard dead, a crime Hank swore he didn't commit, though the evidence suggested otherwise. She hadn't seen him in over a year, but her resemblance to him had caused her no end of trouble. "I don't have a brother," she lied, clutching her basket tighter. "Liar," Callahan spat. "We found his campsite not 5 miles from here. He had my horse." Sheriff Coleman stepped between them. "Now, Harold, we don't have any proof Miss Jameson was involved. Look at her. Same red hair, same green eyes as the man my boys chased off. They're cut from the same cloth, nothing but trouble." Hope's cheeks burned with humiliation as townsfolk began to gather, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Wilson emerged from her boarding house, her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. The laundry customers would cancel now. No one would hire her. The pattern was repeating itself, just as it had in every town since Hank had gone on the run. "I want her locked up until my property is returned," Callahan demanded. Before the sheriff could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "I believe I can vouch for the lady's whereabouts yesterday." The crowd parted as a tall cowboy strode forward. Hope had noticed him around town. It was hard not to. With shoulders broad enough to block the sun and eyes the color of a summer sky, Blake Buchanan was impossible to miss. He managed the Double B Ranch just outside of town and was known for his fair dealings and quiet demeanor. "Buchanan," Callahan acknowledged with a curt nod. "What business is this of yours?" Blake stopped beside Hope, his presence solid and reassuring. "Miss Jameson was helping my housekeeper with mending yesterday. Spent the whole day at my ranch house." Hope stared at him in shock. It was a blatant lie, and they both knew it. She'd never set foot on the Double B, had barely exchanged 2 words with the man now claiming to be her alibi. "That true, Miss Jameson?" Sheriff Coleman asked. Eyebrows raised for a moment, Hope hesitated. Lying to the sheriff could land her in more trouble, but the alternative was being locked up for a crime she didn't commit. Her gaze flicked to Blake's face, finding nothing but calm certainty there. "Yes," she said finally. "Mr. Buchanan's housekeeper needed help with linens and mending. I was there all day." Callahan's face turned an alarming shade of purple. "You expect us to believe that? The whole town knows she's nothing but trouble." Blake's expression didn't change, but Hope noticed his jaw tighten slightly. "The whole town ought to be more careful about spreading rumors without proof. Now, if you'll excuse us, I need to speak with Miss Jameson about returning tomorrow to finish the work." Before anyone could object, Blake placed a gentle hand on Hope's elbow and guided her away from the crowd. She went willingly, too stunned to resist. "Keep walking," he murmured as they moved down the street. "Don't look back." Once they were out of earshot, Hope pulled her arm free. "Why did you lie for me? You don't even know me." Blake glanced down at her, his expression unreadable. "I know enough. I know you're not a horse thief." "How can you possibly know that?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Because I was tracking the real thief all morning. Found him, a man with red hair similar to yours, but certainly not you, unless you've mastered the art of being in 2 places at once." Hope's heart sank. Is he?" "Your brother's alive, if that's what you're asking. Took a bullet in the shoulder, but he'll survive. He's at my ranch now." Hope gasped. "Hank is at your ranch. Why would you help him? He stole Callahan's horse." "Actually, he didn't. That horse wandered onto my property 3 days ago. Your brother was trying to return it when Callahan's men spotted him and started shooting." Blake's gaze softened. "He told me about your situation before he passed out. Said you've been paying for his mistakes." Hope looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "Hank has made a lot of mistakes. So have we all," Blake said simply. "Come on, I'll take you to see him, and then we need to get you somewhere safe. Callahan isn't going to let this go easily." "Why are you helping us?" Hope asked as they turned toward the livery stable. "You're risking your reputation." Blake was quiet for a long moment as he saddled his horse. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and earnest. 6 months ago, I was caught in a blizzard coming back from Helena. Thought I was going to die out there. I prayed harder than I ever have in my life, not just to be saved, but for some purpose that would make the saving worthwhile." He helped Hope onto his horse before swinging up behind her. "Next morning, the storm broke, and I found my way home. Been waiting ever since to understand why I was spared." His arms encircled her as he took the reins. "When I saw you standing there today, something told me you were the answer to that prayer." Hope felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling so foreign she almost didn't recognize it as hope. "I'm no one's answered prayer, Mr. Buchanan. Just a woman with a troubled past." "Blake," he corrected gently. "And we'll just have to see about that, won't we?" As they rode out of town, Hope couldn't help but notice how the whispers and stares followed them. She was still trouble in their eyes, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone in facing it. The Double B Ranch sprawled across the foothills like a kingdom unto itself. Hope had glimpsed it from a distance, but never appreciated its true scale. The main house was substantial without being ostentatious, built of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and beyond them, cattle grazed on lush grassland. "It's beautiful," Hope murmured as they approached. Been in my family for 20 years, Blake replied, pride evident in his voice. My father built it from nothing. Passed it to me when he died 5 years ago. You've been alone here all this time. Blake's chuckle rumbled against her back. Not alone. Got about 15 hands working the ranch, Mrs. Doherty keeping house, and old Pete managing the stables. But if you're asking if I have a wife, no, I don't. Hope felt her cheeks warm and was grateful he couldn't see her face. They dismounted at the hitching post, and Blake led her inside. The interior was surprisingly homey, with worn but quality furniture and touches that spoke of a woman's influence, likely Mrs. Doherty's. Your brother's upstairs, Blake said, gesturing toward the staircase. Second door on the right. Doc Simmons patched him up this morning, said he should rest for a few days. Hope hesitated at the foot of the stairs. Will the doctor keep quiet about this? Simmons has been treating outlaws and lawmen alike for 40 years without passing judgment. Your secret's safe. Blake nodded toward the stairs. Go on, I'll have Mrs. Doherty prepare some tea. Hank looked smaller somehow, lying pale against the white sheets. His shoulder was heavily bandaged, his breathing shallow but steady. When Hope entered, his eyes fluttered open, relief washing over his gaunt features. Hope, he whispered, I'm sorry, so sorry. She sat beside him, taking his hand. What were you thinking coming here? You've put us both in danger. I heard rumors you were in trouble, that men were following you because of me. Hank's grip tightened weakly around her fingers. I had to make sure you were safe. By stealing a horse. I didn't steal it, Hank protested feebly. Found it wandering with a damaged shoe. Was bringing it back when Callahan's men started shooting. Hope sighed. Hank, no one's going to believe that. Your reputation is deserved, he finished grimly. I've done wrong, sister. Not the bank job, I swear I was just in the wrong place, but plenty else. I'm not asking you to cover for me anymore. Hope felt tears sting her eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying it's time I faced what's coming. Let you live your life. Hank's eyes drifted to the doorway, where Blake stood silently observing. Your friend here made me see that. Said sometimes a man has to stand up and take his medicine so others can be free. Blake stepped into the room. We can clear your name on the horse theft easily enough. As for the rest, well, that'll take time and a good lawyer, but it's not impossible. Hope looked between them, bewildered. You're talking as if there's a way out of this that doesn't end with Hank swinging from a rope. There might be, Blake said carefully. The bank guard in Kansas City didn't die, he recovered. The man who actually shot him confessed on his deathbed last month. Hank's eyes widened. How do you know this? I have friends in law enforcement. Made some inquiries after you told me your story. Blake crossed his arms. You're still wanted for fleeing justice, but that's a far cry from murder. With the right legal help, you might serve a short sentence and come out clean. Hope's mind whirled with implications. If Hank could clear his name, then perhaps she could stop running. Stop being the woman everyone whispered about, the trouble that followed her brother's misdeeds. Why would you do all this for strangers? She asked Blake. His eyes, when they met hers, held a warmth that made her breath catch. I told you, I've been looking for a purpose. And you think we're it? She couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. I think helping people who deserve a second chance is it. Blake moved to the window, gazing out at his land. My father taught me that a man's worth isn't measured by what he owns, but by what he gives. I haven't given much lately, been too focused on building what he left me. He turned back to them. So here's what we're going to do. Hank stays here until he's well enough to travel. Then I'll escort him to Helena, where a friend of mine practices law. In the meantime, Hope, you'll stay in town as my guest. As your guest? Hope echoed, confused. Blake's expression remained serious, but his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. People in town respect me. If they think you're under my protection, they'll leave you be. And if we let them believe there might be something between us, well, that would explain my interest in your welfare." Hope felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You want me to pretend to be your— what exactly?" "Let's start with friend and see where it leads," Blake suggested, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Unless you have a better plan." She didn't, and they both knew it. Hope looked at Hank, who nodded weakly. "Trust him, sister," Hank murmured. "He's a good man." Against her better judgment, Hope found herself agreeing to Blake's scheme. The following weeks brought changes Hope could never have anticipated. True to his word, Blake escorted her back to town and made it clear to everyone that she was under his protection. He rented her a small cottage on the edge of town rather than having her stay at the boarding house, explaining that he wanted her closer to the ranch for the work she was doing for him. The work, it turned out, was real enough. Blake's housekeeper, Mrs. Doherty, had been complaining about the mending piling up, and Hope's skill with a needle was genuine. 3 times a week, she would ride out to the Double B with Blake to check on Hank and help with household tasks. Gradually, the townspeople's suspicions began to fade. If Blake Buchanan, one of the most respected men in the territory, vouched for Hope Jameson, perhaps she wasn't the trouble they'd assumed. It helped that Callahan's Arabian had mysteriously reappeared in his stable one night, with a note explaining the misunderstanding. Hope found herself settling into a routine for the first time in years. She took in sewing from the ladies in town, started a small garden behind her cottage, and even made a few tentative friendships. The most surprising development, however, was her growing closeness with Blake. What had begun as a convenient arrangement was becoming something far more complicated. Blake was unlike any man Hope had ever known, strong yet gentle, confident without arrogance, and possessed of a dry wit that often caught her by surprise. He treated her with a respect she'd rarely experienced, valuing her opinions and never talking down to her. One evening, as they sat on her cottage porch after returning from the ranch, Hope found the courage to ask the question that had been bothering her. "Don't you worry what people will think? A man like you spending so much time with a woman like me?" Blake's gaze was steady. "What kind of woman would that be? You know what they say about me." "I know what they said," he corrected. "They're saying different things now." Hope looked down at her hands. "Only because of you." "No." Blake's voice was firm. "Because they're finally seeing what I saw right away, a woman of remarkable strength and character, who's been carrying burdens that would crush most people." The sincerity in his voice made Hope's chest tighten. "You hardly knew me." "Sometimes you don't need to know all the details to recognize goodness in a person." Blake leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. "My mother used to say you can tell more about someone from how they handle hardship than from a lifetime of easy days. And how have I handled it?" "With grace," he said simply, "and more forgiveness than your brother deserves, if I'm being honest." Hope couldn't help but smile at that. "Hank is improving. I can see it in his eyes. He's finally growing up. About time, considering he's nearly 30. Blake's expression grew serious. "The lawyer sent word today. He thinks we can get the charges reduced if Hank turns himself in voluntarily. He might serve a year, maybe less." Hope felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "That's wonderful news." "It means you'll be free too," Blake pointed out. "Free to go wherever you want, start fresh where no one knows your history." The thought, which would have filled her with joy only weeks before, now left Hope feeling strangely hollow. "I suppose I will." Blake studied her face carefully. "Is that still what you want?" Hope met his gaze, surprised to find uncertainty there. "I don't know any more. For so long all I wanted was to escape the whispers, find somewhere I could be anonymous. But now—" "Now," Blake prompted when she trailed off. Now I'm not sure anonymity is worth leaving behind the first place that started to feel like home." She hesitated, then added softly, "Or the people who have made it feel that way." Something shifted in Blake's expression, a warmth blooming that made Hope's heart beat faster. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. "I was hoping you might say something like that," he admitted, "because I've been trying to find a way to ask you to stay." Before Hope could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Sheriff Coleman rode up to the cottage, his expression grim. Blake stood, positioning himself slightly in front of Hope. "Evening, Sheriff. What brings you out this way?" Coleman dismounted, nodding respectfully to both of them. "Evening, Blake, Miss Jameson. Afraid I have some troubling news. Harold Callahan's been stirring up sentiment against you too." Hope's heart sank. "What's he saying now?" "Claims he has proof you and your brother have been working together to rustle cattle from his north range. Says he found your handkerchief near where some calves went missing." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "I know it's nonsense, but he's got folks riled up, planning some kind of meeting tomorrow at the saloon." Blake's jaw tightened. That man never knows when to quit. "There's more," Coleman said reluctantly. "He's bringing in some bounty hunter from Wyoming who claims to have papers on your brother, Miss Jameson. Says he's wanted for murder after all." Hope gasped. "But that's not true. The bank guard survived." "I believe you," Coleman assured her, "but Callahan's determined to cause trouble." "I think he's still sore about Blake standing up for you." Blake nodded grimly. "Callahan's used to getting his way in this town, doesn't like that I challenged him." "What should we do?" Hope asked, fear creeping into her voice. Blake squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We end this once and for all." He turned to the sheriff. "Coleman, can you send a telegram to Judge Morrison in Helena? Ask him to come to Blackwater Creek as soon as possible. Tell him it concerns clearing an innocent man's name." The sheriff nodded. "I can do that, but what's your plan in the meantime?" "That bounty hunter will be here by noon tomorrow." Blake's expression was resolute. "By noon tomorrow, we'll have everything we need to expose Callahan's lies. Hope, we need to ride to the ranch right now. There's no time to waste." The night was a flurry of activity. Blake sent riders to neighboring ranches with messages, while Mrs. Doherty prepared food for what was clearly going to be a gathering of some significance. Hope sat with Hank, explaining the situation and watching her brother's face harden with determination. "I won't run anymore," Hank declared, sitting up despite his injured shoulder. "It's time I face this head-on." By morning, the Double B Ranch house was filled with ranchers, cowhands, and townsfolk who had responded to Blake's summons. Hope was astonished at how many had come, some riding through the night from distant properties. "Why are all these people here?" she asked Blake as he checked the window for the 20th time. "Because Callahan's been stepping on toes for years," Blake explained. "Pushing boundaries, claiming water rights that aren't his, intimidating smaller ranchers. Nobody stood up to him because individually they weren't strong enough, but together." Hope understood then. "This isn't just about me and Hank." "It never was," Blake admitted. "Callahan using you as a scapegoat was just the final straw. This territory needs to decide what kind of place it's going to be, one ruled by bullies like Callahan, or one where people stand together for what's right." A rider appeared on the horizon, and Blake nodded in satisfaction. "That'll be Wilkins. He manages the property that borders Callahan's North Range. If anyone has proof of who's really been rustling cattle, it's him." By 10 o'clock, the plan was set. Blake helped Hank into a wagon, and together with Hope and a dozen determined ranchers, they made their way to town. News of their approach spread quickly, and by the time they reached the main street, it seemed the entire population of Blackwater Creek had turned out to witness whatever was about to unfold. Callahan and his men were waiting outside the saloon, along with a hard-faced stranger who could only be the bounty hunter. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Blake pulled the wagon to a stop and helped Hank down, supporting him as they faced Callahan. Hope stood beside them, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. "Well, well," Callahan sneered. "The thief returns to the scene of his crimes, and with an audience no less." "The only criminal here is you, Callahan," Blake responded calmly. "We know you've been rustling your own cattle to collect on the insurance money. We know you've been threatening smaller ranchers to sell their land at a fraction of its worth. And we know you've been lying about the Jamesons to distract from your own misdeeds." Callahan's face flushed with anger. "That's slander, Buchanan. I'll have your ranch for this." "I don't think so." Blake nodded to Wilkins, who stepped forward with a leather portfolio. "We have signed statements from 7 different property owners documenting your trespasses. We have bank records showing suspicious deposits after you reported cattle missing. And we have this." Wilkins produced a piece of paper that made Callahan pale. "A confession from your own foreman who got tired of doing your dirty work. He's already on his way to Helena to speak with the territorial marshal." The bounty hunter looked uncertainly between Callahan and the growing crowd. "What about my quarry? I was told this man," he pointed at Hank, "is wanted for murder in Kansas." Hank stepped forward, wincing slightly. "I'm wanted for fleeing prosecution, that's true. But the murder charge was proven false. The victim survived and another man confessed." As if on cue, Sheriff Coleman rode up with a telegram in hand. "Just got this from the marshal in Kansas City," he announced. "Confirms everything, Mr. Jameson just said. The murder charge was dropped months ago." The bounty hunter looked disgusted. "You dragged me all the way out here on false pretenses," he said to Callahan. "I don't work that way." He tipped his hat to the sheriff and strode toward the livery stable, clearly washing his hands of the situation. Callahan's bluster was fading fast as he realized how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. "This isn't over, Buchanan." "Actually, it is," came a new voice. Judge Morrison, who had arrived quietly during the confrontation, stepped forward. "I've heard enough to warrant a full investigation into your affairs, Mr. Callahan. In the meantime, I'm placing you under house arrest." As the sheriff and his deputies moved to escort a sputtering Callahan away, the crowd began to disperse, murmuring excitedly about the morning's events. Hope stood in shock, unable to believe how quickly everything had changed. "Is it really over?" she asked Blake. He smiled down at her, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "This part is. Hank will still need to go to Helena to formally clear his name, but with the judge's support, it should be straightforward." Hank approached them, looking more at peace than Hope had seen him in years. "I can't thank you enough, Buchanan, both for helping clear my name and for taking care of my sister." "Your sister took care of herself," Blake corrected. "I just gave her a chance to show everyone who she really is." Hope felt tears prick her eyes. "All my life, I've been running from trouble or dealing with trouble. I never thought I'd find someone who saw beyond that." Blake took her hands in his. "From the moment I saw you standing up to Callahan that day, I knew you were special. Not trouble, just a woman with more courage than most men I know." The townspeople who remained were watching them openly now, but for once, Hope didn't mind the attention. The whispers would be different from now on. "So," Blake said softly, "now that you're free to go anywhere, what do you think about staying right here, specifically at the Double B?" Hope's breath caught. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Blake's smile deepened. "I'm asking if you'd consider making a permanent home with me. I know it's sudden, but when you find your answered prayer, you don't let her slip away." Hank chuckled and discreetly moved away, giving them privacy despite the public setting, Hope searched Blake's face, finding nothing but sincerity and affection there. "People will talk," she warned. "They'll say you're making a mistake. Let them talk. I know what I want." Blake's hands tightened around hers. "I want the woman who faces every challenge with grace and strength. I want to wake up every morning knowing I'll see your smile. I want to build something lasting with you, Hope Jameson." Hope felt a lifetime of wariness and doubt melt away under the warmth of his gaze. "Then yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll stay." Blake's face lit up with joy, and without hesitation he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, right there in the middle of the street. Cheers erupted from the remaining onlookers, led enthusiastically by Hank. When they finally parted, Blake rested his forehead against hers. "You know they'll stop calling you trouble now." Hope laughed, a sound of pure happiness. "I don't mind what they call me as long as you keep calling me yours." "Count on it," Blake promised. "My answered prayer, now and always." 1 year later, the Double B Ranch hosted the biggest celebration Blackwater Creek had seen in decades. Lanterns glowed softly in the twilight as townsfolk and ranchers alike gathered to celebrate the first anniversary of Blake and Hope Buchanan's wedding. The ranch had flourished under their joint care. Hope's practical management complemented Blake's visionary plans, creating a property that was the envy of the territory. But more important than their material success was the home they had built together, a place of warmth and welcome for anyone in need. Hank, now fully pardoned and working as Blake's foreman, raised his glass in a toast. "To my sister and brother-in-law," he called out, his voice strong and clear. "Who taught me that second chances aren't just possible, they're worth fighting for." As applause rippled through the gathering, Blake drew Hope close. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. Hope gazed around at the community that had once whispered behind her back and now embraced her as one of their own. She looked at her brother, standing tall and proud, redemption written in every line of his face. And finally, she looked up at Blake, whose love had never wavered from the day he'd first stepped forward to defend her. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "You know, sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed, that the woman they called trouble found such happiness." Blake pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I told you you were never trouble to me, just the answer to a prayer I didn't even know how to put into words." As the music started up, and couples began to dance in the yard, Hope and Blake joined them, moving together as naturally as they did in everything else. The whispers that followed them now were of admiration and respect for their strength as individuals and their devotion to each other. Hope Jameson, once the subject of suspicious glances and cruel gossip, had found her place at last. And Blake Buchanan, who had once prayed for purpose in a blinding snowstorm, had found it in the green eyes of a woman who matched him in every way that mattered. Together, they had transformed not just their own lives, but the very nature of Blackwater Creek itself, from a place ruled by fear and suspicion to a community built on justice and second chances. And in doing so, they had written a love story that would be told in those parts for generations to come.